We're going to start our bill hearings, and we're going to start with Senate Bill 258, Department of General Services. And we've got signed up from DGS, Teef Chaudhry. Is he here? No? Okay, we've got David St. Sean, Jean. Is anybody from DGS here? And we've got Mariana Rosales from the Nature Conservancy. Sure. Okay. Well, the first two bills are very similar. So, yeah, just see if anybody's outside. Before we go, make a material change here.
Good job.
No one from DGS.
Nobody from DGS? Okay. Okay. Okay, well, they're not here. Okay, they may think that the hearing starts at 2, so let's just go. We're going to skip the second bill, which is Senator Simon Ayers. So let's go to the next bill after those first two. Senate Bill 249. Got the Maryland Port Administration. We've got Holly Miller. Is Holly Miller here? And we've got Robert Monroe from the port. And again, it's Senate Bill 249. It's a department bill, essentially. And whoever wants to lead off, it's a department bills. We're going to give you latitude. I'm not going to put you on the timer. So, and you're the only two witnesses on the bill. Okay. So who wants to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. My name, for the record, is Robert Monroe. I am the Deputy Executive Director of Administration and Environment at the Maryland Port Administration. Prior to starting this position in March of 2022, I worked as an Assistant Attorney General in the Maryland Office of the Attorney General, representing MPA in various capacities for over 20 years, including 12 years as serving as the MPA's principal counsel. At the table next to me, I have with me my friend and colleague, Holly Miller. She is the MPA's Director of Harvard Development and is here to answer any questions as needed. Pardon me, I have a little bit of a cold, so hopefully I'm projecting okay. On behalf of the MPA, I am testifying in support of Senate Bill 249 with amendments. This bill amends the enabling statute for the Cox Creek Citizens Oversight Committee, commonly referred to as the Cox Creek COC, which is an important stakeholder group in the state of Maryland's dredge material management program. The current enabling statute for the Cox Creek COC is pretty straightforward. It sets forth the composition of the committee and the duties of the committees as it relates to the management of dredge material at the Cox Creek Dredge Material Containment Facility, which is located in Anne Arundel County. This dredge material facility is owned and operated by the MPA and is an important facility in implementing the state's dredge material management program. Specifically, Senate Bill 249 would do two primary things. It would amend the composition of the Cox Creek Citizens Oversight Committee to replace obsolete member entities, and it would also clarify the responsibilities of the committee. With respect to the obsolete members issue, the current law sets forth the composition of the Oversight Committee by identifying specific named community groups or associations that no longer exist. SB 49 with amendment seeks to rectify this problem by specifying the composition of the committee in terms of individuals who represent certain geographic waterfront communities, as well as civic organizations like sport fishing and birding that have a strong nexus to the Cox Creek facility. We believe that these changes will allow flexibility for changes in the organizations over time, while retaining the broad stakeholder representation linked to geographic areas and subject matter areas. The other area of modifications to the law is intended to clarify the responsibilities of the committee. The bill deletes language that states that the committee will hear and dispose of complaints. Since its inception, the committee has never been used as an adjudicatory body to hear and dispose of complaints, nor is it legally set up with the due process procedures that would be required to perform such a function. Instead, the new language reflects what has been the practice for over 20 years, which is the committee monitors the operations of the Cox Creek facility, and the committee provides meaningful input, feedback, and recommendations on how the material is managed at that facility. In providing these recommendations and feedback, the committee obviously takes into account the complaints of citizens. It's important to emphasize that the Cox Creek COC is an important component of the state's dredge material management program, which is vital to the long-term sustainability of the Port of Baltimore. Each year, the MPA, through the DMMP, is responsible for planning and for implementing adequate long-term placement for all of the nearly 5 million cubic yards of sediment that the Army Corps dredges annually from the federal shipping channels that serve our Port of Baltimore. To give you some real-world perspective, 5 million cubic yards would fill the Ravens Stadium twice. Dredging in this management of this dredge material is unquestionably one of the port's most important system preservation programs. Without it, big ships could not travel through the federal channels leading to the Port of Baltimore, nor could they berth at our terminals. In sum, the dredge material management program is a foundational component of the port's economic success. Additionally, because the management of dredge material is complex and it impacts a lot of different people in and around the communities in which we operate, MPA works with a broad cross-section of partners, including national, state, and local government entities, nonprofit organizations, community groups, citizens, and businesses to more effectively plan to manage the dredge material in innovative and sustainable ways that both include and benefit our local communities and the environment. The foundation of this community and stakeholder engagement program begins with 7 oversight and advisory committees, which include the Cox Creek Citizens COC. As I said earlier, the Cox Creek COC is responsible for providing input regarding the operation of the Cox Creek Dredge Material Management Facility. Currently, there are 3 very important programs that I'd like to highlight for the committee, which MPA is working collaboratively with the Cox Creek COC on. The first one is the raising of the dikes of the Cox Creek Containment Facility. And when I say dikes, that's basically the walls that surround the facility. We've raised them from 36 to 60 feet. In addition, we have worked collaboratively to develop the Swan Creek Nature Trail, which is a 2-mile loop through a forested conservation easement area adjacent to Cox Creek that provides access for surrounding communities to this valuable green space. The design is nearing completion. Construction is planned to start this summer, and our goal is to open the trail to the public by 2025. Finally, the Cox Creek Dredge Material Management Facility will serve as a very important component in what we believe to be the future of dredge material management, and that is the innovative reuse of dredge material. In late 2022, the Maryland Port acquired an adjacent property to the Cox Creek facility, roughly 140 acres, at which we plan to start up full-scale innovative reuse with private partners of our dredge material. It's our hope that the Cox Creek facility will serve as feedstock for that operation, and that we will be able to enhance not only the communities, but the economy of Maryland through innovative reuse. In sum, we at MPA know that in order to build the future of dredge material management program, we have to work closely with oversight committees like Cox Creek COC and other diverse stakeholders to plan for and design and implement dredge material management programs that, one, protect the environment and Maryland's natural resources, create access opportunities to the wonders of Maryland's natural resources, generate educational and outreach opportunities for our youth and communities, and finally, ensure that some of the more vulnerable communities that do not disproportionately bear the associated impacts of port activities. This is how we build a more sustainable future for both the dredge material management program as well as the Port of Baltimore. For these reasons, I respectfully request this committee grant Senate Bill 249 with amendments a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, well, a couple of things. You say with amendments. I mean, what are the amendments? I mean, do you have specific amendments that you're proffering, or I don't recall. I would exactly what amendments are we talking about?
So the amendments, as I stated earlier, were to, one, change the composition of the committee, and I believe that they have been submitted. I believe that they've been submitted to the committee.
Okay, as long as we have, okay, fair enough. Let me just, you're just here for questions, Ms. Miller, not percent. Okay, so we've got this other bill from Senator Simon Ayer, which we'll hear next, Senate Bill 20. So just for the benefit of the committee, with these amendments, what are the differences between what you're proposing and what Senator Simon Ayer may ultimately be proposing in Senate Bill 20, which we're going to hear next up, just so we can kind of clarify and frame the issues here?
Sure. It's my understanding that those bills are consistent and that there has been some work with Senator Simon Ayer on trying to make them consistent from the Maryland Ports Administration. As long as they're consistent, we support Senator Simon Ayer's bill. And if you want to proceed forward with that bill instead of ours, that's fine.
Okay, fair enough. Senator Augustine, and then we'll go to Senator Simon Ayer.
What DMMP means? What
Oh,
is
I'm
that?
sorry. So that's the Dredge Material Management Program.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the acronym.
No problem.
Okay, to Senator Simon Ayer.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Just for the committee's insight, our whole delegation has been working with the Port Administration for the past 6 months on this legislation and another piece of legislation, which we'll hear next week, which is a little more controversial. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we'd worked out language. And so these bills will be the same. Senate Bill 20, which is mine, will be the same as Senate Bill 249.
That was my understanding as well.
Okay, and then I guess it baffles me because we had talked about this. We have thousands of bills in Annapolis. The Port Administration, we worked in a collaborative manner and we talked about it. And I even questioned why you would put a bill in or why you wouldn't withdraw a bill. We're going to have the same exact bill, same language, and take up more committee time. And yet you proceeded with it. I'm just trying to figure out the reasoning of that.
My understanding is that the Maryland Port Administration through the gubernatorial administration decided to put forward this bill, I think predating yours. I thought that there had been discussions trying to make the bills the same. So as I said, we have no problem moving forward with your bill. And yes, we've worked collaboratively and to the extent that there's duplicity, I apologize on behalf of MPA for that.
And again, just for the sake of the committee, what this commission does is get input from specifically our district, because that's where the facility is and that's where most of the impact, not that it wouldn't impact across the shore and so forth. And we work to try to get the membership correctly. You were going to delete, your department was going to delete an organization that was not defunct, but it actually was still active. So we worked on that, and then the port came and said, we want to basically take a little more authority away from the commission. And I thought that was too much. And we worked together to come up with revised language, which we both agreed upon at that point. So again, it's a little frustrating that we're going through two pieces of legislation where we worked collaboratively for 6 months. And then to come in and bring Senate Bill 249 after Senate Bill 20 was already in there. So just isn't that so?
Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, that's going to conclude the bill hearing on Senate Bill 249, and we do have to now have Senate Bill 20. So Senator Simon, why don't you go up to the witness stand and talk about, ultimately these two bills may be in the same posture, but till we see actual amendments from both you and or we don't know that 100% for sure. So Senate Bill 20, Senator Simon.
For the record, Senator Brian Simon, and I'm going to present it as originally designed. Most time we say that it's an easy bill. This truly is an easy bill where I've worked with the port, I've worked with the communities and other stakeholders, and we have agreement on the whole bill. I'll jump down to here. So basically what the Cox Creek Oversight Commission does is it oversees a facility in our district that brings in dredge material specifically from the harbor and puts it in there. There's been a big project to increase the size of it drastically. We've been kept in the loop on a lot of that, and we appreciate the port on that. It's off of the Patapsco River. And give you one example that we're very appreciative of is, as an example of the output of the commission, is it helped with the port's creation of the upcoming Swan Creek Nature Trail on the property next to the facility owned by the port. Again, what we're saying, all the bill does is replace defunct organizations, alter the name of organizations, their names have changed, and added some new members. It also clarifies the responsibilities of the commission. And with that, I'd ask for a favorable committee report.
Okay, any questions for Senator Simon? And you'll be submitting some amendments that essentially are.
They should have them.
Okay. Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 20. And we're next going to go back to Senate Bill 258. And we've got our Secretary Chaudhry from the Maryland Department of General Services. And we've got David St. John, I don't want to botch it up, from DGS, and then Marriott. Why don't we start with you two? And then we have one additional witness from the Nature Conservancy also signed up favorable. But sir, why don't you lead off and you take the time you need to explain Senate Bill 258.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Atif Chaudhry, Secretary of the Maryland Department of General Services. I am before you today to offer my support for Senate Bill 258. This bill incorporates into statute the goals of Governor Moore's 2023 executive order, leading by example in state government. The bill helps to harmonize state buildings with the state's climate goals and reinforces as well as expands on requirements within the Climate Solutions Now Act. This bill amends and updates current statutes to include energy savings goals and greenhouse gas mandates, including an increase in energy savings for state-owned buildings from 10% in 2029 to 20% by 2031. A revision of high performance green building program to align it with the state's climate goals, and directing DGS to expand the energy performance contracting program, which is a really wonderful program that helps support energy saving measures within state facilities. And ensuring DGS provides oversight on progress, conducts an annual audit, and maintains data and does associated reporting. It also directs all units of state government to implement projects and initiatives to conserve energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions each year. As a support agency delivering not only expertise, but also essential services and facilities operations for state government, DGS is well positioned to oversee the transition of state facilities to a more sustainable model, as we have already seen a 21% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within state government facilities since the year 2018. We thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 258 and look forward to a favorable report. Now I'll hand over to my colleague, David St. Jean, who is the DGS Director of the Office of Energy Sustainability.
Okay, Mr. St. Jean.
Yep. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is David St. Jean. I am. As Secretary Chowdhury said, I'm the Director of the Office of Energy and Sustainability at DGS. And this bill focuses solely on state government operations as it looks to reduce the state's energy use and the carbon footprint of all existing state-owned buildings while providing support for one of our most powerful tools, energy performance contracting. Energy performance contracts are energy projects that are paid for through financial savings and have been used by Maryland state government since the 1990s. Maryland was one of the first states really to adopt EPCs. They deliver for us currently about $25 million in annual savings and approximately 112,000 tons annually of abated carbon dioxide emissions. We need tools such as the Energy Performance Contracting Program and support, such as directing agencies to focus on achieving the state's climate goals from the administration and the legislature for state government to successfully lead by example as we engage in the very real work of achieving the state's ambitious climate goals. Senate Bill 258 provides direction, a benchmark, and authority to motivate agencies toward those goals. And as we maintain and repair our existing facilities and as we design our new ones, project managers and designers alike will look towards legislation such as this to guide their decisions. And for those reasons, we encourage your favorable report of Senate Bill 258, and we are available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Secretary Chowdhury or Mr. St. Jean? We've got Senator Carrozza will lead off.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Secretary. I also want to thank you for the time that you gave me as in your role as a member of the Interagency Commission on School Construction. And we're still working through our issues with Buckingham Elementary, and wanted to let you know as an update that a team from IAC is going to Buckingham Elementary, believe on Friday.
Wonderful.
And I just, my question just is, and just for information, is that I didn't know if the board members occasionally attended some of those field visits as well.
I believe sometimes they do. I at my tenure over the past year, there have not been any site visits for the actual members of the board. I believe members of the IAC, the staff go out and do site visits and report back in, but I'm not sure if they've done any previously.
Okay, I was just trying to, understand that this issue is a top priority in my district and that it
Absolutely.
would be elevated to the board members.
Absolutely. And I think at the last meeting, I asked for an update once the staff went out and did a site visit to look forward to what are the recommendations or options that are available going forward. So we'll be looking into that as well.
And I appreciate your working with me on it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Senator Simoner.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick question for information. I was looking at the fiscal note and I know how there's trade-offs and so it may be neutral or whatever, but it says all the fiscal calculations are based on the executive order and it really doesn't provide any. Do you have any information on the fiscal impact?
Fiscal impact of savings, the 20%
Here, why don't
savings
you
goal.
move a little closer to the mic?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Fiscal impact on the 20% savings goal.
Right, as far as the investment, and then I imagine you get some savings or maybe even more savings. Do you have any analysis? of
So
that?
20% savings goal for us may simply be business as usual. Because since 2018, we've already reduced our energy use in state government buildings by 12.5%. And so if we simply keep doing what we've been doing for the next few years, we will reach 20%. And that's primarily because as we replace pieces of equipment in old buildings that are old and not operating even to the standards that they initially were supposed to operate to, we're replacing them with pieces of equipment with new federal standards, efficiency standards from DOE. And so we just find that buildings are using less energy over time. And in fact, we're in the midst of a 50,000 LED fixture replacement in state buildings, which will add a couple percent in itself. So we just feel like we're going to get through just business as usual.
Okay.
And Senator, there's going to certainly be capital investments associated with this. We're looking at obviously any building or renovations, construction or renovation, 35,000 square feet or more will go to full electrification. The capital costs associated with the construction renovation were going to be incurred anyway, but we would, instead of going to fossil fuel, we would be going to full electrification, which may adjust the pricing on that slightly. But energy performance contracts, which we mentioned in our testimony, is sort of a no cost option as well that we can implement, that the energy saving associated with the duration of the energy performance contract will pay for all the upgrades to the facility. But there certainly will be capital costs associated. I mean, obviously we talked about very creative solutions here, but there certainly will be some capital costs associated with achieving these goals and obviously going towards net carbon neutral by 2045.
If I may follow up. Yeah, so the 20% savings goal, I think, is probably business as usual. Electrification and BEPS compliance is a different animal.
We had a whole briefing on that topic last week. Okay, we've got Vice Chair Kagan, then we'll go to Senator Hester after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Chowdhury, thank you for all that you're doing. You and your department are always so wonderfully responsive and thoughtful, and certainly your leadership and the governor and lieutenant governors for our climate goals is critically important. I'm on page 4 of the bill, lines 1 through 3, talking about buildings of at least 2 million square feet. And I'd love to know a couple of quick things. First off, what number of all the buildings that DGS oversees are 2 million square feet or more? And obviously, the larger the building, the bigger bang for the buck in making changes. But I wonder what you're doing other than the LED bulbs, which were just referenced. So thank you for that, Mr. St. Jean. Just wondering, are the smaller buildings kind of off the hook? What other movements, what other changes are happening in some of the smaller buildings that are not included in the audit?
No, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And here it's I believe Section F, subsection 1 is an energy and greenhouse gas emission audit of at least 2 million square feet. So none of our buildings are that large, but that includes multiple buildings that will total 2 million square feet. So it will be a range, and we won't be doing the same buildings each year. So every year we'll be looking at different buildings. Smaller buildings, obviously, will be consolidated over to a lump sum total of 2 million square feet to do the assessment. And then based on those, we'll provide recommendations for safe energy conservation.
Thank you for that explanation. Sure. So then all buildings in the portfolio then are eligible to be included, audited, and have their emissions reduced?
Absolutely, yeah. And they're not just DGS owned buildings. These are all state facilities.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Hester, and then we'll go to Senator Lewis Young.
Thank you. And I want to thank you also. There was an issue in my office that you resolved very quickly last year, so I really appreciate it. So we did just have this hearing on the BEPS, and I understand that state buildings are exempt. But I had 2 follow-up questions. So we're not exempt? Okay, well, that's great. I was curious how, so my first question is how close this bill gets us to meeting what's outlined in the BEPS regulations. And then secondly, how we're heating and cooling these buildings right on campus here, including the James Building, the Miller Building, the State House, and what it would take to electrify those buildings.
You want to take the BEPS one?
Sure. I'm sorry, when you mentioned the central plan, I started thinking about that. The first part of your question again.
You can jump into that also, Dave, as well.
So I guess, first of all, clarify whether or not the state buildings are exempt from the BEPS regulations.
State buildings have to comply with BEPS.
They do, okay.
Yes.
And so how far will this energy performance contract go to get us towards those?
So along with in the BEPS regulations, there's removing fossil fuels, burning of fossil fuels on site in facilities. And there's also an EUI goal associated with different building types. And it really depends upon which building class you're looking at. in order to get it from our current EUI energy use index or energy use per square foot to comply with BEPS. 20% for us for this savings goal, which is in the executive order going into statute, covers all buildings, not just the ones 35,000 square feet and above. So it sort of adds to the energy savings overall because it's including all buildings. But I can't say specifically, I mean, it helps us get to these goals, but for some buildings, it may actually exceed the goal of BEPS, the EUI of BEPS. For some buildings, it won't get there. We'll have to do more. And the question about energy performance contracting and how that helps us achieve these goals, it will help us achieve EUI goals. It will not help us achieve electrification because there are typically minor cost savings associated with electrification. And energy performance contracts are structured around reducing your energy use or sometimes fuel switching in order to save money that pays for the project itself.
My question was like, take the James building. If we wanted to electrify the James building, how would we do that?
Right, so there's a central plant here, which we're burning natural gas in to generate steam, which gets pushed out to each building. We either abandon the central plant and we look at islanding buildings with their own electric systems, or we somehow convert the steam plant from natural gas to electricity. Right now, there is really only one way to do that with an electric resistance boiler, which is a fairly simple switch, but very expensive to operate over time, like 3 times the cost of using natural gas. So we're hoping, and this is not a pie in the sky hope, over the next few years, heat pump systems will come online that will generate steam. They currently exist for industrial systems, but not for the types of uses that we have here with office buildings.
So I think, Senator, the part of the answer to that question is we're exploring all options. Technology is sort of catching up as everyone's looking to electrify to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. And I was talking to David about this. I grew up with a heat pump in the house, and it never got warm in the home. You know, it was always sort of lukewarm, and you never really felt warm. So technology is catching up now, where these heat pumps are more efficient and more effective, and operate in these colder climates to actually provide the level of you know, HVAC support that's needed for these types of buildings.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Lewis Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, panel. I had some concerns about the overall impact of this because I think I read somewhere that buildings are the #2 contributor towards greenhouse gas emissions. So what percentage of all buildings in the state would be included by these particular buildings? So that's part one. And part two is, have you considered extending this to buildings owned by any entity that are either receiving state funding or receiving state tax breaks?
Yep. So this bill covers essentially any buildings that are state owned. So DGS and the agencies that we kind of oversee, MDOT agencies and USM. So it's about 100 million square feet. Now, how many square feet of buildings are in the state? I can't tell you. I mean, I'm sure it's less than 1%, but these are buildings that we can control, which makes it somewhat easier. We can somewhat control them, which makes it somewhat easier for us. As far as expanding this beyond state buildings, really no comment. I don't. Yeah.
2.0.
In the number of buildings that DGS has oversight of, with the exception of MDOT, is over 1,400 buildings. So all those would be included, and that certainly we want the state to be a leader and lead by example here, and that may lead to other avenues of tax breaks or anyone that has state funding in there as well, capital grants, anything else. Right now, they wouldn't be subject to this particular statute.
If I may follow up, that lead by example, I mean, that's the purpose of lead by example, is that when the state figures out how to, for instance, convert steam or to generate steam using electricity instead of natural gas, others will follow. Right? That's what we're trying to do.
I had one quick question. I don't have the executive order in front of me, but Does any part of the executive order dependent upon the BEPS regulations that are currently pending in ALR? I mean, the question if for whatever reason those regulations are delayed or pulled or whatever, would that have any impact on anything we're talking about here?
No, sir, the BEPS came in after this was,
Gotcha.
the executive order was drafted.
Okay. Any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none. We do have one additional witnesses, so you want one witness, and that is Mariana Rosales from the Nature Conservancy. And Ms. Rosales, why don't you come to the witness table, and you're on the 2-minute clock, and you'll be our final witness on
Thank
Senate
you.
Bill 258. You signed a favor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of Senate Bill 258. For the record, my name is Mariana Rosales. I am the Director of Climate of the Nature Conservancy in the Maryland, DC chapter. In case some of you are not familiar with my organization, we are an international environmental organization. We work in over 70 countries and in all 50 states in this beautiful United States. We own and manage the largest network of private conservation lands in this country, and we understand the importance of leading by example. TNC considers that SB 258 will allow the Maryland state government to do just that, to lead by example like true leaders do. It would allow the administration the capacity of having an updated set of tools to reduce emissions from government buildings in accordance with the state's ambitious goals. Why is this important? As Senator Karen Lewis just mentioned, the building sector is one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases here in Maryland. We have the Climate Solutions Now Act that is an amazing, ambitious pathway to cut emissions over the next 2 decades, but it's nothing if we don't implement it. We appreciate the effort of all the agencies and all the stakeholders that came together to define this amazing set of goals, but we need to walk the talk. There's too much to do and time is running out. SB 258 allows a better alignment between the requirements and the outcome that we want to achieve. By approving this bill, you give the state the chance to lead by example, to act in consequence, setting high building electrification standards in its own house. For this reason, we urge a favorable report on SB 258. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for our witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 258. Next up, we're going to move to Senate Bill 268. And this, we're going to bring up some folks we heard a little earlier from our Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bays Critical Area Program and the Commission. Lisa Horger from the Critical Area Commission and Kate Charbonneau also from the Critical Area Commission. Favorable for, again, Senate Bill 268. So who wants to lead off?
I will. Thank you, Chairman Feldman and Vice Chair Kagan and members of the committee. As Chair Feldman said, I am Lisa Herger and I am the Legislative and Regulations Coordinator for the Critical Area Commission. And seated to my left is Kate Charbonneau, who is the Executive Director of the Commission. The bill we're asking for a favorable recommendation proposes updates to existing enforcement provisions in the critical area law that are intended to bolster local enforcement efforts and allow for the state to respond more effectively in the event of egregious violations that occur in the critical area. The bill does 3 things. One, it makes technical changes to our statute that allows for the different types of enforcement processes used by our 64 local jurisdictions, and it removes that specificity. Next, the bill removes a 30-day waiting period before a referral of violations by the chair of the commission can be sent to the Attorney General, which for various reasons over the years may or may not have been being enforced. And that could allow for further degradation of resources if a violation continues. And finally, the bill clarifies when the Attorney General may bring an enforcement action. These provisions are necessary to ensure the Commission's role in ensuring consistency across all 64 jurisdictions that we work with. The changes to the critical area law in 2008, which we spoke about earlier regarding enforcement provisions, have been and are effective. And we now are just cleaning up some of those minor wording for more consistent application. And we also just have more experience since 2008 with applying that 30-day hold and the types of significant violations that would warrant a quick action from the Attorney General's office. This bill does not take away the enforcement authorities that rest with our local governments. That remains with local governments as it always has. And for these reasons, we ask respectively for a favorable report on Bill 268.
You here just for questions or?
Yes, I
okay.
am.
Okay, any questions for our either Ms. Charbonneau or Ms. Horger? Seeing none, that concludes our bill hearing on Senate Bill 268. And we're going to next go to Senate Bill 281. I'm looking at the audience. I do think we've got some DNR representation here. I don't know if Secretary Kurtz is here today. I started my day this morning with Secretary Kurtz. Becky Golden from DNR as well. And then we want additional witnesses, not in DNR. Chesapeake, we'll take them separately, but first of all, you are not Secretary Kurtz, so why don't you tell us who you are? You are a familiar, and you are a familiar face to all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am not Secretary Kurtz. He is currently in the House doing the State of the Bay overview, so he should be jumping over here any moment. For the record, I'm Dylan Baylor. I'm the Legislative Director at the Department of Natural Resources. Here with me is Rebecca Golden, our all-around submerged aquatic vegetation expert at the agency. Here testifying in support of Senate Bill 281, Natural Resources Submerged Aquatic Vegetation Alteration or Removal Requirements. This bill is rooted in recognizing the important role that SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation, plays in bay restoration. SAV provide critical habitat and food for recreational and commercially important species like blue crabs, fish, and waterfowl. SAV add oxygen to the water, absorb nutrients, sequester carbon, trap sediments, and reduce shoreline erosion. And while we have made important progress on achieving SAV goals, we are only at about 33% of historic levels in the bay and 24% of those historic levels in our coastal bays. This legislation will make necessary updates to DNR's SAV statute to ensure that that SAV remain a top priority in bay restoration moving forward. Now more specifically into what the legislation does. This legislation lowers the width requirement from 60 to 20 feet for which SAV can be removed without approval from the department for boating purposes and by utility companies. The purpose of this is to better align with other boating and navigational practices. This legislation will also require individuals rather than encourage individuals, if they are utilizing those exemptions, to contact the department and let us know what additional information about that SAV removal. That way we have the better information to be able to track that and get a more holistic picture of the impact that those actions are having on SAV in the bay. And then lastly, this bill also ensures that the coastal bays, not just the mainland bay, are included in the exemption and requirements for departmental notification that I just touched about. And then very lastly, on the more technical side, this legislation updates language around SAV removal, removes the terms such as harvest, and instead changes that to cut and trim to better align with actual practices that happen. So with that, I respectfully request a favorable report of Senate Bill 281. Me and Becky are here to answer any potential technical questions. And thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, we've got our two Department of Natural Resource witnesses. Any questions? Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dylan, it's great to see you here and congratulations on your new, the latest success in your career. Several years ago, I sponsored a bill way outside my lane that dealt with SAVs. And so I learned more than I ever might have expected for my Gaithersburg and Rockville constituents. But there was conversation about helping the water people by mapping SAVs so that they could navigate around it and not damage and not all that. I wonder, because I'm going to be partisan for a second, the Hogan administration was less collaborative and cooperative about moving that forward and creating an app and all that. And I just wonder whether the Moore Miller administration can you give us an update on that issue, on that project, how it's going? Is it still a priority?
Yeah, so I don't think the bill hearing is not today, but I think it might have been previously in this committee, but we have a departmental that is a sunset extension on the authorization for us to allow watermen to plant aquaculture where there are SAV. And that original authorization was supposed to expire this year. So we're seeking a 3-year sunset extension on that. So we can do exactly that. And that way we can better monitor and get the data to better figure out how that is commingling. And we actually have an MOU with the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science to do just that. So that is a top priority for the administration moving forward as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, we do have one additional witness signed up favorable from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Doug Myers. Is Mr. Myers, why don't you come up? She's written, yeah. And our DNR folks, you're released. You don't have to sit there. Mr. Myers, you're gonna be on the clock at 2 minutes, okay?
Yep, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Doug Myers. I'm the Maryland Senior Scientist at Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Since it's my first hearing of the session, I'll use my customary greeting that I represent 120,000 humans that are members of Chesapeake Bay Foundation, as well as 3,500 species who could not swim up to testify today. Chesapeake Bay Foundation is in support of Senate Bill 281, which makes important clarifications and updates to Maryland's submerged aquatic vegetation program. The bill will now require, rather than 60 feet, a 20-foot wide swath to be cleared for navigation, which is a huge minimization in the right direction. It also clarifies the trimming and cutting are there as methods, because that allows the root zone to persist, which is super important for some of the ecosystem services that you heard Tillen talk about, which were the carbon sequestration in particular. Seagrasses are one of the most effective at removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and putting it into the root mass. And so cutting rather than removing allows that to continue. The bill's reduction in the allowable width is very important, but also the current bill allows for a very narrow instance where some of the NPDES permittees or wastewater treatment plants could still use herbicide. I think it's a fairly rare occurrence that would happen, but I think it's okay for us to allow the department to maintain that flexibility. Because in some cases there is the requirement to remove larger areas, just to know that it's very difficult to keep herbicide application from affecting more than a 20-foot wide swath. So with that being said, Chesapeake Bay Foundation seeks a favorable report on SB 281. Thank you for your time.
Great. Okay, any questions for our witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on this particular piece of legislation, which is Senate Bill 281. We're going to next move to Senate Bill 284, and it is back to DNR. Dylan, you're up. And we also have signed up Paul Pedito. Is he here? Or
He is upstairs testifying right
okay,
now.
well, then you are the lone witness representing DNR.
Yes, it is a DNR day at the legislature.
Yes, Senate Bill 284.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair. For the record, Dylan Baylor, Legislative Director at the Department of Natural Resources, testifying in support of Senate Bill 284, Natural Resources Sale, Barter, or Exchange of Mounted Specimens from a Decedent's Estate. Firstly, the Secretary wanted me to extend an open invitation for you all to come to DNR and see the vault in our basement of all the different taxidermied mounts that we have. Which kind of leads to the rationale for the need of this bill by the agency. This is a relatively straightforward and technical bill, but every year DNR receives numerous requests from individuals trying to dispose of taxidermied mounts associated with the estates of deceased individuals. And right now, the only option for those individuals are to donate or dispose of them. Unfortunately, though, there are not that many institutions or organizations that actually receive these donated mounts. So DNR is on the receiving end of a lot of them, and unfortunately, some of them are disposed. This bill is relatively straightforward. It would just allow legally acquired mounted specimens to be sold if the original owner is deceased and the specimen is a part of that individual's estates. This just provides another important option so that these specimens are not disposed of in the event that they cannot be donated. Neighboring states do this. Pennsylvania and West Virginia permit the sale of certain taxidermied mounts. And with that, I would respectfully request a favorable report of Senate Bill 284, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions for our witness? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 284. Thank you. The next move to Senate Bill 293. And we have the Maryland Environmental Service Representative Charles Glass here in the House. And again, we're on Senate Bill 293. And Mr. Glass, it's all yours. We're not going to put you on. We're not going to put you on the timer.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan. For the record, my name is Dr. Charles Glass. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Service. We're here today to discuss House Bill 78, MES's only departmental bill this session. We're just proposing a few technical changes. Say again?
You meant, yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't have the Senate bill number, but
we know what bill it is.
you know what it is. Yeah, I'm
It's
sorry.
Senate
Yeah,
Bill, it's Senate Bill 293. Yeah.
293. So there are just some technical changes we're making to our statute. We like to make to our statute related to the governance and board of directors, legal and contractual, just some language changes and some reporting requirements that we have some input on from DLS. So the first item, taking them in a subject matter, in groups by subject matter, we have a quorum minimum threshold required right now that is at 5 of our 7 voting board members, and we would like to lower that to 4, just a straightforward quorum. There have been some delays where we've had procurements that we couldn't move forward because of some very unique circumstances. Our board is generally always present, but we've had some conflicts of interest with some of our board members that have special technical skills in the environmental area. And we had an unfortunate loss of one of our board members, and just the timing of replacing board members caused some impact. So that's that issue. We'd like to have some responsibilities delegated for the board secretary, one of our board members that serves as the board secretary. We like to authorize that person to delegate responsibilities to an employee at MES. This is very similar language to our board treasurer's delegation capability. Next, in the legal and contractual area, we just really want to add just the District of Columbia to the term of a municipality and federal entities, so that that's covered in our statute for greater consistency. We do have some federal grants, and we do some projects supporting units inside of DC, particularly DC Water. Also, a proposal versus contract. MES is required to submit a contract to when requested right now. That requires legal sufficiency that slows the process of letting someone know the general cost of our service. And we would like to be able to provide a proposal so that the basic scope of work could be laid out for opportunities without having that requirement of legal sufficiency. For reporting requirements, MES has several audit requirements. There are 2 that we just like to combine so that the dates are not so ambiguous and have them in one report. We do this every year, our annual financial audit. The current law says do as soon as practical after the close of the fiscal year. That is our annual financial independent audit. And our annual report, the current law says due within the first 90 days of each fiscal year, make a report of its activities. So we over the last several years, this has been out of sync, which has led to delays in getting all of our reports to you. And we would just like to complete them together. So we propose to clarify this by just having both due to the General Assembly no later than October 31st. And this is in concurrence, the last item is just misallocated expenses audit. We've discussed this with DLS, and this was a function of the early goings in the last Reform Act. We completed this detailed audit of unauthorized spending, misallocated expenses, lack of conformity with state law or board policies and other accounting areas. We completed that and delivered it. And during the 23 session, the Department of Legislative Services advised MES that they interpreted this provision as being a one-time audit requirement. So we agree that it would save some funds and delay, and MES proposes just removing that from statute as it's no longer needed. And all of these changes, they have no fiscal impact. I would argue that they would provide some minor cost savings for the agency that could hopefully be passed to overhead that we charge our partners. And that concludes my testimony.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Glass on Senate Bill 293? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 293. And next go to Senate Bill 299. Dylan, if you want to come back up here. Sarah Lane is also here signed up, and we're going to bring Miss Lane up. Dylan, you want to lead off? Again, we're on Senate Bill 299.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, for the record, Dylan Baylor, the Legislative Director at the Department of Natural Resources. Here with me is Sarah Lane from the Department's Chesapeake and Coastal Services. Testifying in support of Senate Bill 299, Coast Guard Council Duties and Authority. The original Coast Guard Council passed in 2014, and it really set forth and established guidelines for how buildings should be built to be climate ready, and create a system for the review of capital and local investment projects. Since then, though, the council has evolved to enhance the process of review, as well as to establish clear guidelines for proposed project siting and design. In the current process and in the current statute, the Coast Guard Council is authorized to issue waivers to certain aspects of the design or siting, part of the council requirements. However, the Coast Guard Council does also currently issue categorical exemptions to the full slate of those requirements for buildings that are built with an obvious necessity to be exempt from those requirements. Those types of structures include water-dependent uses, passive public access, historic structures, temporary structures or uses, and emergency uses. This bill codifies that practice to make sure that it's in the statute. And then this legislation also empowers the Coast Guard Council to recommend regulations to adoption for adoption to the Secretary. So that way the Coast Guard Council moving forward can continue to have the authority to clarify and set kind of more guardrails around all of these policies and the decision points around the council. It's a relatively straightforward bill. And with that, I would respectfully request a favorable report of Senate Bill 299, and me, Sarah Lane and I are here to answer any technical questions that anyone might have.
Okay, any questions for our two DNR witnesses? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 299. And we're gonna next go to Senate Bill 300. And is Mary Owens here, or is she gonna be testifying?
Yes, she's here.
Okay. Along with you, Dylan. So why don't you lead off again? We're Senate Bill 300.
Awesome. And the secretary should be here any moment, so we will tag out for the next bill. But
He just walked.
oh, there he is.
So if you want to supplant, your underling here, Dylan has done a fantastic job in your absence, but
Sure. Cool. Well, we're on
Senate Bill 300.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee. Thank you so much for having me today. For the record, Josh Kurtz from the Department of Natural Resources. I apologize if I'm a little out of breath. I am not as in good shape as I should be. All right. Joining me today is Mary Owens with the Park Service, and she's here to answer any technical questions that y'all may have on the bill. So this really, SB 300, which I'm here in support of, is really an important bill for us because it explicitly authorizes the department to take necessary action to preserve and restore 2 historic structures in the Beltwoods wildlands. Wildlands were established in statute as part of the park system, and they are meant to be preserved for their wilderness character. So What we're looking for there is minimal infrastructure, minimal disturbance, and protecting that not only the character, but the ecological function of those places. And because of that, the statute is limited in our ability to do different types of work within the wildlands. However, within Beltwoods Wildlands, we recently discovered two historic properties that have significant value to the state of Maryland. The first, the Calvert Barn, which was likely built in around 1825 by an enslaved community, is a really fantastic example of 19th century Tidewater tobacco barn. It's constructed using the original Tidewater techniques, and it is remarkably large of an example. It's the largest early 19th century barn in Prince George's County, and if not Maryland. The second piece, the Seton Barn, which was built between 1890 and 1900, is also large, very distinctive for its Victorian design, such as the pyramidal shaped and louved cupolas, the jigsaw and pendants, and the overhanging eaves. So these both have very unique and historically significant, not only materials, but also the ways in which they were built. Also, both of these are eligible under the National Historic Register. Right now, because of the wildlands designation, we are unable to do the work to restore and protect these from falling down and from being lost. These are really important parts of the story of Maryland that we seek to basically tell at the Department of Natural Resources through the Park Service. And so we are looking to be able to do the work to stabilize these facilities before they fall down. There is one technical amendment in our testimony from MNC, the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, to require consultation with them prior to the work, which we're happy to do. And with that, I respectfully request a favorable report and happy to take any questions.
Ms. Owens just here for questions. Okay, Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, thank you for bringing this bill forward, and I appreciate the bill. No questions actually on the bill except a potential amendment. We have wildlands in the Patuxent State Park also, and recently we've had several, over the course of some time, some emergencies where we haven't been able to get in there to help the person in distress. So you couldn't take a medically, equipped RTV like in to bring the patient out, and they had to be taken out on a backboard by foot over fallen trees. And time is life sometimes, and so I've been approached by the Lisbon Fire Department and a local group of volunteers who do the clearing around there to see if we could get an amendment to this bill to allow them in to clear some of the downed trees in the wildlands, just so that we can save people if they need to be saved. Would you be open to an amendment like that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss that and come up with language. I think what we would want to do is still protect the integrity of the wildland, but be able to create that opportunity for safety. So yeah, I'd be happy to have a conversation about how we can do that.
Thank you so much.
Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, thank you. Welcome back, and thanks for all you do. Building on Senator Hester's great question. When the Secretary of DeWitt was here, I asked her about an app, and we can talk offline. It's called What 3 Words, and the entire globe is mapped with a 10-foot by 10-foot, and in waterways, in parks, in wildlands, it can help find someone who's injured, and it helps people identify, it helps our first responders and others. And so I am a huge fan and would love for the administration and the departments where it makes sense to be looking into that as to whether we should be incorporating that in our life-saving work.
Yes, that would be, I really appreciate that conversation. I think, having the natural resources police at the department, one of the things they do is they're the ones that go out and help us either rescue people, find people. And so any way that we can better prepare them and better equip them, and in partnership with many of our local firehouses, EMTs and law enforcement. So yeah, that'd be a great conversation. Be happy to have it.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, any questions for the Secretary or for Ms. Owens? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 300, which takes us to Senate Bill 304. So Secretary, you can stay right there. Senate Bill again, 304. I don't know if you want to bring anybody else up. Nobody else is signed up, but you can obviously bring anybody from your team up that you like.
All right, perfect. Sarah. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined today by Associate Director of Fishing and Boating Services, Sarah Widman, to answer any technical questions you may have on the bill. I'm here today to speak in support of SB 304. And this is really an important bill for us because it makes a variety of changes to the State Boat Act. The State Boat Act is a comprehensive piece of legislation and a piece of code where we're working in partnership hand in hand with the boating public to ensure that they have safety and that we are providing safe waterways, access to water, a wide range of things. The best way to think about the bill that we have before you today is kind of split it in half. The first half is very technical, and the other half is more substantive or programmatic changes. So I'm going to tackle the substantive side first. So the first is the inclusion of electronically propelled personal craft in our state definition of personal watercraft. We're also removing the term Class A vessel from the state law, as the United States Coast Guard has recently removed any references to these types of vessels. We're also updating language around personal flotation devices to align with the Coast Guard's updated PFD guidance and making several other editorial and conforming changes to the State Boat Act to align with the Code of Federal Regulations. So really what we're doing, we're updating the State Boat Act to align with the Coast Guard. And there's many provisions within there that allow us to do that. I'm going to move on to the substantive side of the bill now. The first is this creates a $12 voluntary non-motorized vessel decal. And so this is really important. A major tenet of this bill is that we're looking to have more registered boats or vessels within the state of Maryland. So you're probably wondering, why do we want more vessels that are registered? Well, firstly, because of the number of registered boats, it actually allows us to get more grants from the federal government. And so this decal for non-motorized vehicles, it would be $12. And so the $12 isn't to raise revenue or to raise funding for the department. It's to be able to administer the program and actually put these out. But what this does is it creates a numbering system for kayaks and canoes. And so it's fully voluntary, but this provides two benefits to the owner of that kayak or the canoe. One is it relates to the Natural Resources Police. We get a significant number of calls of an upturned kayak and upturned canoe in our waterways. By having this decal or this sticker, NRP would be able to immediately make a phone call, find out whose boat it is this just something that blew off your dock, or is one of your family members missing in the water? Right now, we're immediately triggering a rescue response. So this will help not only with our staff time, but really returning people's vessels to them. And then again, it goes into increasing the numbers we have that would allow us to tap into the federal grant. And interestingly enough, there are many states like in the Midwest, like Ohio, that have similarly numbered of registered boats that we have right now in Maryland because they register things like kayaks, canoes, and stand-up paddle boards. The bill also updates a variety of fees related to the State Boat Act. And these fees are fees that are user pay, user benefit, some of which right now don't even cover the cost of mailing the sticker. And so what we'd be looking to do would be one, to change the manufacturer or dealer's license from $25 to $50 and from $2 to $20 for fees related to issuing, transferring, or requesting a duplicate certificate of title. Additionally, the legislation would create a tiered approach to boating certificates of numbered registrations. So currently, under current law, the motorized vessels are all charged a $24 fee. That's regardless of size of the boat, horsepower of the engine. And so what this legislation proposes to do is create kind of a tiered approach to that, matching what some of our other sister states and neighboring states like New Jersey and Delaware do, where the size of your boat would determine the amount that you would pay for your registration fee. And that's directly related to where these fees go. The larger boats need larger slips, they need deeper waterways, they need more dredging. And so this would help us align some of the benefit that the larger boats receive for projects that end up being a little bit more expensive. Additionally, with these fee structure, the same fee structure for vessels that meet the Coast Guard documented use requirements also require us to get a Maryland use sticker. So it's kind of aligning some of the existing programs that we have. The last thing this legislation would do is it would require sailboats over 16 feet to also require a certificate number. And that would, again, allow us to increase the number of registered boats to be able to pull more federal funding into the State Boat Act. the funds within the State Boat Act are really diverse. And all of them benefit the boating community, whether that be paying for natural resource police to do boater safety, a wide range of things, to our licensing and registration service. But I'd say the big one, the big programmatic one that's so important, is our Waterway Improvement Fund. Historically, for the past 5 fiscal years, we've only been able to fund 64% of the requests of the Waterway Improvement Fund. This goes to dredging local waterways, expanding public access, a wide range of practices that the boating community wants. And we really came up with this idea by working with the boating community and the boating industry, including the Marine Trades Association of Maryland, who represents about a $4.2 billion industry, constantly running into issues there and in speaking to some of our local government partners about not having enough money within the Waterway Improvement Fund to do what they want to do. So I know there's a lot in this bill, but we would respectfully request a favorable report on SB 304, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, any questions for Secretary Kurtz or his teammate there, Ms. Woodman? Okay, Senator Simoner.
Thank you. Dylan told me to wait for you to get here for any kind of question. Seriously. I was looking at the bill, it almost slipped because it just says it's alterations. And I understand the fiscal situation we're in as a state, but I'm also trying to see how much we're doing, because a lot of departments are coming in increasing fees, and I'm just trying to keep track. So how much net or how much additional fees will be coming in through this?
Yep. So there's two pieces to that. The first is the registration fees. We are projecting about $8.4 million annually for the changes to that now tiered approach to registration if this bill were to pass. The second is how much additional federal funding we'd be looking at. It's really hard to actually calculate that because a third of the federal equation is actually registered boat numbers, but we'd be looking in the range of several $100,000.
Okay. And then you say it's tiered. Are the smaller boats, is their increase a lot smaller, or I mean, is it?
Yeah,
I didn't get a chance to look at every
Yeah,
specific fee.
We actually dropped the fee for smaller boats. So if you are a 16-foot boat with 7.5 horsepower motor or less, it goes down to 20. It was at 24.
Okay.
And then from there it goes up. So 16 feet with greater than 7.5 horsepower is $50. Between 16 and 32 feet is $75. Between 32 and 45 is $100. 45 to 65 is $125, and over 65 is $150.
Okay, and then you mentioned 64% for dredging was only available. So is this money primarily going to go to that, or are there other efforts? And then just let me follow up with that, because my district's almost surrounded by water.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we get requests for dredging, which I think the Army Corps also does.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prioritize them when you don't have enough money?
Yeah, so the bulk of this money, or the goal for all this money, is to put it back into that user pay, user benefit model. So that 8.4, the majority of that is going to go to those projects on the ground to make sure that we're not having this oversubscription problem. In terms of making decisions about dredging, I don't know, Sarah, if you want to take that one, or we can follow back up, but.
Yeah, you can follow up. That's fine. Mm-hmm. And I just got one or two more questions. Mm-hmm. What is the balance of the fund that we're talking? So you're adding $8.5 million to what?
Currently, it's $24 million annually. That's what we've appropriated this year.
Okay, 24, and then you're adding $8.5 million. Okay, and last question, there was a section here talking about speed zones and the ability to put notice up. Is that basically putting out a speed sign and saying 6 knots or a buoy or something? Can you just explain what you're doing there?
Sorry, can you ask one more time? I was writing your former question, so we didn't miss it.
You get close to the mic there.
Yes, there's a section in there talking about speed zones on the water, and they can alter that without notice, I think.
Yes. So in our research of looking at, right now, it's handled differently than all our other regulations, for the most part, because it was never changed when the Administrative Procedures Act went in place in the 90s. So before that point in time, so our regs go through a whole process. It comes to ALR, to you, the whole process. Before that time, it was all done through legal notices to make sure people were aware of changes to rules. And for whatever reason, all of the boating speed zones remained with that old way of notifying people. So right now we duplicate a process every time we do the speed zone changes each year. It's on an annual cycle. So we would advertise that in legal sections of newspaper like we used to do before the Administrative Procedures Act. And then we go through the whole scoping process, which we're required to do with small business impacts, and then present all of that as a proposal through the ALR process and get public comment through the Maryland Register, which is the current way we handle regulations. So right now it does two, and it can be costly depending on how many notices we have in a year. But also it's just very duplicative of a process.
Okay, that's helpful.
Does
Thank
that,
you.
okay.
Okay, any additional questions for the secretary? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 304. Next go to Senate Bill 305, Mr. Secretary, and also signed up was Richard Ort from your office. Mr. Ort. Mr. Secretary, you want to lead off, or Mr. Ort, whatever you want to handle?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. And joining me today is Richard Ort. He is the Director of DNR's Resource Assessment Service, which the Maryland Geological Survey falls within. Rich is here to answer all the tough questions. The technical bill in front of you creates a special fund for the Maryland Geological Survey. This is really important for us for two reasons. One, it gives us some flexibility, and it also increases the transparency of accounting for the Maryland Geological Survey. So as an agency, we are primarily composed of special funds, and the Geological Survey is one of the only entities in the department that does not have a special fund associated with it. So currently, the Geological Survey charges some overhead to local governments, nonprofits, and other entities that we work with. That revenue currently does not have a dedicated place to go within the department, so it goes into more of a catch-all accounting bucket. So our fiscal team, keeps it in that. We are able to roll it over for 1 year. We do spend it down pretty quickly, but what it does is it kind of creates an inefficient process, and it doesn't really provide very clear accounting or transparency for the citizens of Maryland to see where that fund is going. And so the special fund also, the way it is set up right now, or the fund not being a special fund, it does not generate interest. And so we can't actually do long-term planning with this. And the key to this special fund is, as we bring in this overhead, it allows us to think about the equipment needs for the Geologic Survey, or any programmatic changes that we would occur a financial kind of need for. And so what this really does is it allows us a little bit more flexibility in spending the funds, and more transparency for the public. With that, I would respectfully request a favorable report on SB 305, and we can answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you for bringing this bill. So you're located, I believe you're in my well, there is a building that says Maryland Geological Society and Survey, and it's on St. Paul Street, and it's there. And so that is where you operate at, or are there other locations?
That is where the Geologic Survey is based out of. Rich is there primarily, but he does come down to Taws when he is unfortunately enough have to come for meetings with us.
And so I know on your website, there's a little bit about the history, but I can pretty much guarantee this is the first time anyone's come forward to say anything about the Geological Survey. And it has historically had a really important role. And so can you just tell us a little more what you're contemplating and what you're thinking about it? Because you have had impacts on groundwater, and there's just a number of things. So can you help us see how this fits in with the broader environmental goals? So I guess of MDE as well as DNR, what will?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to just make some brief comments and turn to Rich, who I know has a lot of thoughts on this. But the Geological Survey is part of our Resource Assessment Service, and that is really one of the big science muscles within our agency, and not only within our agency, but benefits the state. And the Geologic Survey plays an incredibly important role when we think about water, when we think about lands. And so I think it's one of those things that we should be highlighting more. But I think Rich can touch on some of the strategic places we're looking to go, and I think the significant value it provides to Marylanders.
It's a beautiful building too.
So Senator Washington, I've been in your district for over 30 years. In fact, unfortunately, a lot longer than that. So the geological building there is the original Goucher College building. So as you suggested, there's lots of history. It's on the National Registry for Historic Places, and the whole old Goucher neighborhood is in the historic places. And that is the center for the Maryland Geological Survey. Inside that building, what you may or may not have seen is lots of laboratory equipment and lots of expensive field equipment. In fact, right now we've got over $300,000 worth of field equipment being drugged behind a boat on a wire doing the Bay survey today, right now. So that equipment depreciates over time and it tends to quit at the very most inopportune time. Establishing a special fund that is non-lapsing, where this overhead can build up over time, can earn interest, which as of right now, we have no fund to do that, will allow us to replace that equipment in a proper time frame, do the proper types of accounting for it, so that when I'm billing depreciation of equipment for any of our lab equipment, for you name it, whether it's Anne Arundel County, Queen Anne's County, WSSC, American Rivers, that money can then be put in the right place, so that the right use of that money can be performed. And that's what this special fund allows. So yeah.
Just one more follow-up question. So that big empty lot that's near the building, that's, seems like it's been for sale for 100 years. So is that related to the?
So that does not belong to the state.
I know it doesn't.
So
it's just what.
If you're familiar, you're probably familiar with Kelly Cross.
Sure.
So Kelly Cross from that neighborhood went to a previous secretary at the time, Secretary Joe Gill, to ask for a program open space, and we, as a department, declined them. I'm sorry, this predates you. We declined state POS money for that and suggested that they talk to the city for their local POS money for that. But that is, just so you know, it's held by a realtor group in New Jersey, and they want $3.2 million for that lot. So that sums up why we don't own it.
Got you. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, any additional questions for the secretary or Mr. Orr? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 305, which brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to the final bill of the day, Senate Bill 306, and this comes from our Critical Area Commission again. So we're going to bring back up Lisa Horger and Kate Charbonneau, I think, and also Eric Fisher to describe Senate Bill 306.
Thank you, Chair Feldman, members of the committee. It's an honor to be back in front of you again this afternoon to speak to Senate Bill 306. I'm here with Catherine Charbonneau, our Executive Director, and Lisa Herger, our Legislative Coordinator, to answer any questions that you may have about the bill. I apologize, I am restoring my testimony here as we speak. Okay. Apologize for the delay. I also apologize for putting a 35-page bill between you and the end of your work today. But I think we can all agree that this is an important issue, multiple important issues, climate and equity, as well as efficiency in government. We talked a little bit earlier today about how the impacts of climate change especially range from significant to life-changing, and that they are heavily focused in Maryland on our shoreline areas, whether it's flooding, erosion, or sea level rise. The good news when we think about trying to manage all of that is that we do have an established, effective, deeply rooted partnership between state and local government that is here to focus on our shorelines. We simply need the word from the legislature to be able to act on these issues. Right now, the commission can only consider today when we are managing development in these areas. This is despite the fact that we are seeing an increase in certainty about what we expect tomorrow in terms of how our shorelines will look. And as we acknowledge the disparate impacts from yesterday that continue to play out in our shoreline communities today. So how does the bill actually work? As I mentioned, it's a lengthy piece of legislation, but we can sort of sum it up in three pieces. It incorporates climate provisions into the decision-making and rulemaking of the state commission as well as the local critical area programs across the state. It does the same for equity. And then it has a series of changes to the implementation of the law that touch, I think, the lives of property owners, applicants, and local governments in ways to make us all a little bit more efficient and effective in what we do. So we're going to go through in a little bit more detail how each of these sections of the bill work. First, I want to touch on climate and equity. The decision-making of the commission at the state level comes in two parts. One, generally, we approve state and local public projects, state and local government projects directly. That's an approval from the commission. We also approve what are known as growth allocations, which is essentially an upzoning in the critical area. So if something is proposed that is more intense than what is allowed by the current local program, that's something that the commission weighs in on. This bill adds both climate and equity into the list of considerations that the state commission undertakes when they review those categories of applications. Additionally, it allows the commission to make rules related to climate resilience, dealing with climate resilience, and dealing with issues of equity. Commission is in a fairly unique position among state creatures when it comes to rulemaking for two reasons. One, we do not have unilateral regulatory authority. We have a specific list of topics that we are allowed to make rules on. That list currently does not include climate, and it does not include equity. So we feel as a commission, it is currently outside of our scope. This bill would add those considerations to our scope. Secondly, our rulemaking process is particularly collaborative with local jurisdictions. As much fun as it would be for me as chair to promulgate regs on my own, I cannot. Our full commission votes twice on a legislative package, and our full commission is made up heavily by representatives of local government. Secondly, it directs local jurisdictions to include climate and equity considerations in their local programs. What do we mean by local programs? We mean planning, we mean zoning, we mean site development and subdivision. Those are the kinds of activities that have always and will remain the prerogative, the purview of local government. We simply want to make sure that these issues are included when they are exercising those functions. Thirdly, some of the administrative efficiencies that we're looking at. One is a measured increase in allowable lot coverage on smaller lots in the critical area. We find time and time again, people on lots of a half acre or left butt up against very well-intentioned, but potentially unworkable limits to lot coverage. So we're providing an extra allowance there. In practice, these tend to get worked out through variances, which is time consuming for everyone, and we don't think it usually results in the best outcome. Secondly, we are doing a measured expansion of the allowances for accessory dwelling units. We know that housing is a major issue facing the legislature this year. We wanted to be able to do our part there again and smooth that process and get it out of the realm of variances and into more of an administrative function. Third, we're providing a voluntary allowance for transfer of development rights programs at the local level, specifically to help with climate resilience. This could potentially provide a pathway for a property owner who has a property that is going to get wetter than it already is to realize significant value from that site by selling their development rights to another property in the same jurisdiction or potentially even in another jurisdiction. This is entirely optional and opt-in for local jurisdictions, but we think it's something that would help. Fourth, we are responding to a court decision regarding the commission's authority over mapping mistakes. This is when an actual mistake, not a bad decision, but an actual mistake has been made in the critical area maps, and it has been very unclear for applicants and local jurisdictions what the standards are in how we adjudicate those. So we are incorporating a recent court decision into our law to make that process more clear. Finally, number 5, we are asking for some accounting procedures to be instituted for fee in lieu funds. When a local jurisdiction approves a project or the state approves a project and a developer pays into a fund instead of actually mitigating themselves, we just want to know where that money's sitting, why that money was collected, and where it's going. Part of that is just good government, it's good bookkeeping, but part of that also will allow us to open up additional opportunities for funding climate and equity mitigation, because we'll know where the money came from. We know how we can leverage it potentially with grant funds and other funds to expand that pot. Just a quick word on how we built the bill. We built the bill based on the 40-year history we have of partnership with local government and the existing structure we have. This regulatory authority we're asking for, this is items 17 and 18 on that list. So that is, it's not a new type of approach. It simply speaks to today in terms of authorities that we have. And then it's items 16 to 19 in the composition of our local programs. So again, we're building on the foundation that we already have. We're also using, where we can, familiar approaches in state law. The changes we're making to the schedule of local program updates mirrors almost exactly the updating of comprehensive plans in the land use article that's been working so well for a number of years. So we brought that right in. Where we could on our definitions, same thing. Cited other articles, cited other statutes that the legislature has already adopted to preserve your good work and make sure we're staying consistent. Finally, a little bit of a word on how to resource all of this. Time, tools, and treasure. First, the local program updates, which I know has been a priority concern for the Association of Counties. This is going to be on a rolling schedule. There's no hard and fast immediate deadline that we're expecting everyone to come in and get their programs updated. Climate's an urgent issue, but we want to make sure we're doing it right. And we want to make sure people have the time to get things in order. So there is time in this bill. Secondly, there are tools. We anticipate putting out model ordinances for many of these things, so folks are not left wondering what the state commission expects or hopes to see in these programs. We're realigning staff to make sure that our commission has the resources to coordinate with local jurisdictions. And we are picking tools that already exist to inform this work, whether it's EJ Screen on the equity side, or the State Highway Administration viewer, or the University of Maryland Environmental Science sea level rise projections. We're pulling in existing vetted tools wherever we can. And finally, we're putting our treasure behind it. We do have a local assistance fund that we're recalibrating to make sure we can help fund these updates and looking actively for grants wherever we can, as I said, to expand that pie. So in conclusion, we believe these changes are overdue. But we also believe they're doable. And we believe they'd be very impactful for our shoreline communities around the state. We've been working with interested and affected parties as much as possible. I would note, I think, that we have some good news with the Maryland Association of Counties that Dom can speak to in more detail, but we have a set of amendments that we'll be delivering to the committee shortly that I think we're in alignment on. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you.
Are you just here for questions or? Okay.
They are.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I, on a number of reasons, just really like what the commission is working towards. I'm interested in number 4. I believe you listed it as number 4, and like if you could point it to me in the legislation where you're talking about lands that are becoming wetter. Where is that in the bill? And if you could talk a little bit about that, because you're walking this interesting line between local zoning and also adhering to what your mission is.
That's right.
And what your mission is in 2024. Okay, so I understand that. So how are you defining those lands and who would be, what would be eligible? I guess that would.
Thank you, Senator.
And if you could point in the bill where that is, and then we can follow up.
Yep, absolutely. So there are a couple of different places in the bill where we touch on that. I think part of your question may get to page 19.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Okay. Yeah, provisions for identifying areas vulnerable to climate change. That's where the off-the-shelf tools, I think, come in. There are a number of sea level rise projection products that are being put out by different state agencies. We are looking at each of those And I would envision the commission working with the local jurisdiction to see where the comfort level is with each of those tools, and determining which ones to use. We do have the statewide climate change projections and sea level rise projections that the Maryland Commission on Climate Change has been using, and we anticipate bringing those in as well. So yes, there's a map. And what that map means for the property owner, I think, is maybe the second part of your question. And that's where a program like transfer of development rights is likely to come in, where, of course, we're not telling anyone that anything they already have a right to do can no longer be done. But if you want to do something new, maybe doing it somewhere else is the best idea, right? That would be the best outcome. So if you can transfer your equity to another site, that would be the ideal.
This is sounding a little bit about what, Mr. Chair, what we're doing with some land and forests. And I wonder, is that the model, that there's land that's getting wetter and that one could, are you suggesting land swaps? You mentioned equity, but
Okay.
since it's not delineated in the bill,
Sure.
I'd like to know what we're
Absolutely.
what we're trying to set up here.
Sure. So specifically on the, and it's TDR for short, transfer of development rights. There are transfer of development rights programs around the state for other reasons. So we know that it can be a workable model. What it would look like for this case is, let's say there's a property that's getting washed out and it has the ability to develop 4 homes. One potential model would be that in an area that is going to remain drier, the developer there can increase their density by purchasing those 4 development rights from the wetter property. So the wetter property owner recovers the value without putting the project in harm's way. And those units are accommodated elsewhere in the jurisdiction.
And then I guess my other question is the definition of, I mean, you're already certainly adjusting for what a critical area is. Lands that flow into the bay. So, for example, you know, my district has the head of the watershed, the Herring Run watershed, and then it goes into the Chickapin Run, and then it goes back into the Herring Run, and then it goes down, and then it goes into the bay. And along that, there are areas, and kind of these areas are in this middle place where they, in some ways, don't really fit into any of the protection boxes just that we currently have. So is this any of this notion, or direct us to where would these types of areas that are wetting, where there is, you know, increased runoff due to development all around, where the land maybe is sinking down, but it's feeding into ultimately the Chesapeake Bay, where would those water or those critical areas, I mean, they have their streams and underground streams, and they have critical areas. So where would we look for those protections, or would a broad definition include those? I'm just trying to understand.
I understand, and I think you're highlighting the fact that our environment, our entire state is an environmental system, right? And we've sort of drawn this semi-arbitrary line at 1,000 feet from tidal water. Our program, this bill, doesn't expand that boundary, but we do try as much as we can to make sure the critical area program works hand in glove with other land use management tools that the local jurisdiction is applying. So their comprehensive plan, their floodplain ordinances, and those types of things. So where we can, and where we see places where we can overlap, even on policy, let's absolutely do that.
Okay, Senator Caruso.
Thank you. And I appreciate if you can kind of bear with me, because I have some specific questions and kind of a general one. Representing Worcester County, is the only county that oversees both the Chesapeake and the coastal bays. And I've had the good fortune of working with people at the county level, some that are still there, some that have moved on. and some of them who were actually involved with, I guess, or had been part of that process when in 2008, when you did that overhaul. And, you know, certainly in your earlier presentation, you kind of gave us reasons why, you know, pointing to the need for some of the, you know, changes that you're proposing in this bill. The questions I have started to receive, and I will, you know, be more specific with my chair and my members, because I've actually asked for some, you know, some language that could possibly be used for amendments. But there's the concern seems to be that some of these terms are a little loosely defined, and you know, we probably need to take that next step. So my first question on page 7, line 17, what are some of examples of the incentive-based programs that would help local jurisdictions review and approve such projects? And how would the general public know what these incentive programs are?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Senator. I think the specific reference in number 13 initially is to set the stage for the transfer of development rights option for local jurisdictions that I spoke about a moment ago in response to Senator Washington's question. There could be others, and we're hoping to leave room for local level innovation on this issue, but the TDR program was the one we had in mind with regards to number 13.
On page 15, line 12, make sure I got it right. What I'm looking at that, I know we just had touched on the transfer of developmental rights, but what are we doing as far as a detailed definition?
I think there would be a number of definitions associated with a TDR program. This is in the section where we could adopt regulations governing them. So the specific definitions would be worked out as part of our regulatory process with the local jurisdictions.
So I think maybe some of the concern is that by it not being defined in the legislation, it's presenting some angst. So, you know, I would certainly ask you to be open to, if we can, you know, work on some amendments or language that might address kind of what might be appearing a little loose and subjective, that we could drill down. And I think that would more clarity for both local government and also locals who are involved in these projects would be helpful. My last question is on page 24, lines 23 through 26. When we're talking about allowing the pervious materials, you know, kind of allowing that for that, but should there be in this section, should there be language that did not cap the amount of square feet of lot coverage that could be used for this?
Certainly understand an interest in doing that. I think one of the purposes of the critical area program, in addition to water quality, is habitat protection. And the hope is that on almost every site in the critical area, even our most highly developed, we're able to preserve some element of habitat. And so that is why we see a numerical cap in the legislation, because we know that as you expand the footprint, even if water flows freely, it's still impacting the habitat value of the site. So that's why we included a cap. in that location.
So I think where some of my locals are coming from, they're saying that, instead of that approach, if you required those materials to be used to obtain a stormwater management plan approval as part of the critical area review and kind of leave the pervious, non-pervious science over at MDE. So, I think just given the complexity of some of these projects and the fact that you have multiple agencies, commissions, departments at both the local and the state level involved, I think what's being offered here is some suggested improvements that might allow us to meet our goals, but do so in a way that provides more clarity and maybe more options. So, I would like to follow up with you on those specifics and would ask my chair that, those recommendations be reviewed by our committee as well.
Okay. Senator Simon, are you good? Okay, any additional questions we've got Senator August?
Thank you. So I forgive me, I'm running in and out, but I'm gonna come back to the question that I asked before. So around the language, and it actually says the mapping is but not less than 8 years, right? So given the speed with which things are changing and moving, help me understand the rationale for this, which would say, again, not less than 8 years, so it could be even longer. Could you help me understand?
Absolutely. And we can have Lisa talk a little bit in more detail. I think overall, Senator, what we want to avoid is a situation where the regulatory earth moves under an applicant's feet. And that's the shortest answer for you. But Lisa, you could talk maybe a little bit more about what's involved at this point.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. What Chair Fisher just described to you. In fact, now in the first round, we are working with local governments to put in specific provisions for folks who are caught between the regulatory shifting of the line. And we anticipate that will continue in the future. But the other thing is the mapping process. I believe the second round, after we're done this first round, which we're almost completed, will be quicker, as I mentioned earlier, because we're starting with a more accurate base mapping. And that's why we're suggesting this can be less than 12 years, as it was stated in 2008. However, there is some time that we need to take with our local government partners because they're involved in the review of those maps. So we also don't want to rush it with them. We want to still give them adequate time to review the changes we suggest to them when we're doing the updates.
Get that to a degree, but what about, I mean, the way things are going so fast, like you end up in a situation where you know that these dramatic changes have occurred because they also are not smooth, right? They're not smooth. And then you're stuck, right? So what do you do in that situation?
Right. And
do we have some sort of fail safe for situations like that?
Maybe I can help answer that question. So the mapping update changes that 1,000-foot boundary, which is the most furthest out. The shoreline itself and the edge of the tidal wetlands, and Chair Fisher mentioned this during his presentation, we have a 100-foot buffer off of that shoreline. That is regulated based on current field conditions. And so if a development project comes in and they want to be close to the shoreline, they are out there delineating it and putting it on that application. So we are seeing those shoreline changes today. What we're not seeing is that 1,000-foot change, and we will see, as over time. But the really critical place that we need to account for is right at the shoreline, and we are doing that. Sure thing.
Or follow up, Mr. Chair. I'll be honest, I'm struggling a little bit with, maybe this is in keeping a little bit with what Senator Carrozza was saying, like what climate change, I mean, I'm not trying to be, but it's just what is it? You know what I mean? Like, because you're giving it a level of prominence in here, but it really, there's some good parts of it where you do define things a little bit more. But I do worry that you don't just use the defined terms, which I think is a little more clear than the way you have climate change in some places, then that it might be not interpreted as where you have it delineated in the one portion of the bill, if that makes any sense.
Yes, absolutely, Senator. I understand where you're coming from, and we could carry some of those terms forward.
Yeah, I just think that it's kind of like not as clear, and I would hate's not the right word, but we leave from here and you're just using climate change and it's just not what was delineated necessarily because it's not that way in the bill. I just think that would be, I would hope it'd be something you would consider.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Washington and Senator Hester.
One topic, and if I missed it, but it's something I've been thinking about since I saw this program about it, ghost forests. So I know that is an issue and that we have not addressed that at all. So is that something we'll be talking about? Where would it fit into this? And would like to fit it in because it's an issue. Maybe you could tell people what ghost forests are, and other states are doing something specifically about it.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. So a ghost forest, and you see these all over the critical area, but especially on the lower eastern shore. If you see what looks like a bunch of blanched toothpicks standing up next to a shoreline, that is a ghost forest. And that is what used to be a mature stand of loblolly or some other pine or hardwood, where the sea level has risen to the extent that salt is getting into the trees. And they can only handle a certain amount of salt. And once it gets above that level, they die, sometimes very dramatically, en masse. And it is a significant problem for the state in terms of forest loss. One of the areas I think that we can really get at that with this bill is on mitigation. Because a popular way to mitigate for projects in the critical area is planting forest. We want to make sure that we are not putting new trees down in places that are likely to have struggles with saltwater intrusion in the near term. We want to make sure we're using the right species, the right location, the right timing and maintenance, those kinds of things. So I think that's one of those things that you would absolutely see in the rulemaking process that follows from this legislation. We're very cognizant of that as well.
I had a bill and I just decided not to put it in. We could look at that. And I agree with my colleagues that a lot of good concepts, but we need to be specific in certain areas because resilience does have a different meaning in this context, right? And so it has a different meaning in the DNR context. And you do have this interesting overlap of habitat and water quality. So and then that overlap. So is habitat the land and the animals, the people, or is it just the land? Is it all the water that flows through that? So I do think that there's we can decide and just put it into the definition section that in this section of the code, this is what it means. And there are a few places in legislation that can reference other parts of the code, which you did a pretty good job at, I have to say, for the most part, better than most. I will say that. But I think in this area, we definitely need to know what we're talking about when we say climate change and resilience and
Okay, we're basically, the message
Thank you.
here is we're looking for some tightening up of the language,
Sounds good.
statutory language. Senator Hester?
I was just curious, when we created the Office of Resilience in MDEM, there's a Chief Resilience Officer there. Have you had the opportunity to meet with them? And because one of the things that they will be doing is creating the state plan for resilience and the baseline. And I think that probably you guys who have been here, longer than he has, it would be just a great conversation to have, but that he might also have some comments on the bill.
Yes, in fact, we have met with MDEM and they had questions about our resilience definition as well. They did not have any suggested changes to that definition. Obviously, we want to make sure that our definition is consistent with the state. And certainly if there are ways we can make it more specific to our purposes, I think we'd be interested in doing that, but we are coordinating and will continue to coordinate with that office.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you, folks. We do have one final panel on this bill and for the day. And I'm just going to call, got 5 witnesses left. We've got 5 seats and then we'll be done. We're going to go with Doug Myers from Chesapeake Bay Foundation, David Namazi from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, Annie Richards, Shore Rivers, Matthew Johnson, Arundel River Federation. And I was going to, Dominic Butchko, I was going to keep you separate because you're favored with amendments, but in light of what was represented earlier, that there might potentially be a kumbaya moment here, we're going to add you to be the final witness. So you'll be last and we'll start, Mr. Myers, we'll start with you and we'll go down the horn. We'll end with Mr. Butchko and then we will be done for the day. Okay, so you start and we're going to put everybody on the clock here. Okay, Lamoria, the clock. Yeah, we're good.
Thank you again, Chair, Vice Chair of Committee. My name is Doug Myers. I'm the Maryland Senior Scientist Chesapeake Bay Foundation in support of SB 306. We believe that it is very much time to incorporate details of climate and equity into the critical area program. I appreciate the committee's questions. They reflect a lot of your understanding of how complex these issues are, especially as they occur on the ground. Unfortunately, the Critical Area Act uses a 100-foot horizontal definition or 1,000-foot horizontal definition for something that is really tied to elevation. And we have, some steep sloped shorelines that will not be very affected at all. Other very low elevation, low lying shorelines will have significant change in the physical definition of where the critical area is. And I think we have to understand that. So I would say, in addition to low lying areas that are currently at risk, we're looking at saltwater intrusion of agricultural properties that are in low lying areas and areas that have significant stormwater or drainage networks that are located at low elevation. So 3 communities come to mind: Cherry Hill, Turner Station, and Anacostia. If we're going to incorporate the equity piece of this, we really need to see how equity and climate change are really coming together. Some of the most underserved communities occur in low-lying areas. And so this will affect them more disproportionately. Also, wetlands that are located in the critical area are extremely important for water quality and habitat. Those need to be protected. And I think the proposal that the department's putting forward is going to go a long way to doing that. So in order to save time, Chesapeake Bay Foundation urges support for SB 306. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Dave Namazi. I'm here on behalf of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science in support of SB 306. As you all know, Maryland has 3,000 miles of shoreline. It is, we face the challenges of climate change statewide. In particular, though, the coast ribbon of the along the bay and ocean is particularly vulnerable to areas impacted by climate change, particularly rising sea levels. I'm just going to touch on that and I'm going to try not to copy anything that Doug mentioned before me. But, in essence, our sea level rise rate, UMSI just completed a report in 2023, is essentially a foot over a 50-year period. In the last century, it was half that in the entire century. For the next century, between 20 and 2050, it's going to be a full foot, perhaps even more depending upon what's done. These areas along the coastline are most vulnerable to that. Some of the good news is that we have tools that are better and better at measuring impacts and understanding it. This may help the aforementioned discussion of how we could apply these tools to the coastline itself, so we could get a better understanding not only of the direct impact of sea level rise, but of storm surges and other things that can be really detrimental to the coastal zone itself and the coastal areas in particular. Finally, I want to just emphasize the fact that it's really important to recognize that the impacts of climate change will disproportionately impact those who could least afford those changes. And that's a key reason why It's crucial for the Critical Area Commission to consider environmental justice and equity in its decision-making process. With that, UMCS supports SB 306. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on SB 306 on behalf of Shore Rivers. My name is Annie Richards. I am your Chester Riverkeeper. Shore Rivers is the voice for waterways of the Eastern Shore using science-based advocacy, restoration, and education. The Eastern Shore is low-lying and sensitive to the effects of land subsidence and climate change. Continued erosions of our shorelines and seasonal tidal inundation have massive impacts to our waterways, and it's all happening in the aptly named critical area. The critical area has an 80% delivery rate for nutrient pollution. That delivery rate can be augmented considerably by floods and unseasonably high tides. A recent study from the Bay Program's Caesar report found that nitrogen delivery exceeds its annual loads defined by TMDL allocations by 30% during just one king tide event. That makes a huge impact on our waterways. The Caesar report also notes that urban stormwater runoff is the fastest growing source of non-point source pollution statewide. As the Chester Riverkeeper, I'm a community resource for municipalities whose infrastructure is suffering from current climate impacts. I think environmental advocates, city planners, and local government would all agree that there are no easy solutions here. SB 306 allows the Critical Area Commission to work more effectively with local planning offices to site development in more responsible, resilient locations, alleviating future financial struggle for counties and homeowners. Despite the Eastern Shore being known for its open space, very little of it is open for local communities to enjoy. Considering open space and public access in addition to other important environmental justice values is an exciting addition to the Critical Area Commission's purview. Siting housing developments along critical area can often landlock communities, particularly underserved communities, from accessing the waterway. And in closing, SB 306 can increase the potential for equitable public access. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Matt Johnston, Executive Director of Arundel Rivers Federation. We're a local water quality organization based right here in Anne Arundel County, fighting for clean water everywhere, and specifically in the Southwest and Road Rivers just south of Annapolis. So I'm here today to share a personal story with you because I think that this gets at why we need changes to our critical area law to protect our communities moving forward. Traditionally, as a water quality organization, we visit our communities after small rain events, or I'm sorry, large rain events, and we deal with designing and building rain gardens and stormwater ponds to deal with water quality in our coastal areas, in the critical area. That has changed. Everything has changed with climate change. 3 weeks ago, as we all sat here, Annapolis was flooding with a large high tide event. We actually are under a coastal flood advisory right now for this evening at 9 p.m. We'll have a 2.5 foot rise. This is happening more and more often. This January, my staff and I have gone to many of our coastal communities where we would normally build rain gardens, and they're asking us, can you redesign the shoreline? Can you put in flood pumps? Can you redesign the culverts? Can you protect us from what we just saw and from what's coming? That's what this bill is meant to do. And if I can put on another hat for just a moment, previously I was a critical area commissioner for Anne Arundel County, and I can tell you I'm excited that this bill doesn't get into all the specifics because I served on a committee for them that wrote the regulations for solar in the critical area. And there is no group of public servants better than your critical area commissioners and that staff to write these regulations and bring in stakeholders to get it right for everybody involved. So on behalf of Arundel Rivers, I urge you to support Senate Bill 306.
Okay, Dominic, you're playing cleanup and you're the FWA favorable with an amendment or amendments.
Big old bear hugs, Mr. Chair. So Dominic Puchko with the Maryland Association of Counties. First, I just want to give a big thank you to the folks at the Critical Area Commission and for Eric. He's been working with our team and our local officials extensively on a number of friendly clarifying amendments. Most of them are reflected in our testimony. There is going to be some minor adjustment around the edges, but with our amendments, it cleans up a lot of our concerns, and we think it's a good bill with that. So we urge a favorable report with amendments, and thank you again for the commission for their hard work.
Okay, any questions for this entire panel? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 306, and that concludes our work for today, ladies and gentlemen of the EEE Committee. Oh, and I have to do this.